All right, I got it. Hey, online people, can you guys see my PowerPoint?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. All right. Constitution, this is where we're going, okay? Talking about the Constitution, we learned about a ton of different vocab last class. Remember? Remember when we did that? I know it was a long time ago, Monday, right? We did the whole vocab assignment. We learned a bunch of different things, a bunch of different words. All that stuff is going to come back to haunt you today, all right? Because we're going to be talking about a lot of those words today as well. Beginning with these 6 basic principles. And this is us getting into the Constitution. Number 1, popular sovereignty. Who remembers popular sovereignty? Talked about it Monday, right? The government can only rule with the consent of the governed. So who's really the source of power here? Who is it? The people, right? Have you ever heard power to the people? Rule for the people, by the people, right? Anybody heard of that? Yeah? The people are the source of the power. Your constituents. They're the ones who put you in office. They're the ones who pay your salary, essentially. Where does this principle come from? Well, it comes from the Declaration of Independence. It says there, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Why do you think this is like something that they wanted to throw in the Constitution? Why does the consent of the governed matter? Yeah, so we're not having like another King George, right? Because are they experiencing a lot of issues with King George? Are they big King George people? Do they like him? You think they got like the King George flags running around, throwing King George birthday parties and stuff? Probably not, right? They kind of hated King George. One of the big reasons, taxation without what? Representation, right? We're seeing that they're not really having, there's not a lot of consent. You see things, and we'll talk about some other things too, where you have court rulings are kind of going against them as well in many different ways. And, you have King George's inside men appointed as like judges. And it's like, if I get up to the stand and I'm a colonist and I'm suing somebody or doing something, and they're probably going to side with who? Me or King George? King George, right? So there's a lot of irritation. The biggest reason why all of these things happen in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, people are irritated. People are mad. They don't like the way they're being treated. So you'll see a lot of these things in the Constitution are going to be, kind of used as protections. Number 2, limited government. Government is effective, but restricted. So government isn't so limited that it's just kind of a worthless, thing that just exists, right? Did I skip anything? Oh, like the UN. So government is effective, but restricted. So government's not all powerful. But does the government have power? Yes. But where does that power come from? Again, where does it come from? The people, right? Government's not powered by a bunch of batteries. Powered by the people. Okay. Power lies in the people. It can only do what they have given it the power to do. Constitutionalism. Government must obey the laws outlined by the Constitution. This is something that changes a little bit over time. You'll see judicial review and stuff like that kind of comes into play. Some of that stuff is not around at the very, very beginning, the birth of the Constitution, and it comes around a little bit later. Rule of law. We talked about that last class. Government and its officers are always subject to the law. We also talked about how it's a little ironic, considering it does seem to be that there are, cases of corruption where rule of law doesn't necessarily come into play. In a perfect world, though, rule of law would be, always followed, and it is thought to be always followed. For example, we see here, does anybody know where this is coming from? This example right here. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, abridging the freedom of speech of the press, the right of the people to peacefully assemble, and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Where's that coming from? What amendment? First one, right? And it has this really important clause in it. Does anybody remember the name of the clause? Starts with an E. Yeah, an E. The E clause. No, I'm joking. I was joking. It's not the E clause. It's the establishment clause. Remember that? What does it mean to establish something? If I'm established in 1783 or so, you always see that on like clothing brands, right? or businesses. You're made, right? Or you're set up, you're created, or you are, you're established, basically being like you are set in place. The government shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That is getting at the idea of like the government can be like, hey, welcome to America. Here's your card. Everybody here, if you take a look at our FAQs, frequently asked questions of America, what religion are we? Well, we're all Catholic or Christian, right? Can the government do that? No. Can you be whatever you want in America? Can you be an atheist? Can you follow the Church of Satan? Yeah, people do it. I don't know why. Don't ask me why, but people do it, right? Nobody's saying anything about that, okay? It's okay. That's the thing about the Establishment Clause. You're not going to, it also affects things like in school, right? Can I get up here and just start being like, all right, everybody, let's bow our heads in prayer? Can I do that? No, because I'm basically a government official, okay? I would be acting almost as the government, right, in like a public school. That's where you see differences between like public school and like Catholic school. Do you think if you went to a Catholic school, your teacher's going to be like, let's bow our heads in prayer? Yeah, probably, right? Because the different ways that the idea of the First Amendment infiltrates schools and different systems like that, it really depends on like what kind of setting you're in. You'll see that the First Amendment is not always this like, all protecting thing either. There are limitations to it as well. The separation of powers, government power is distributed among the three branches of government. Does anybody know who represents the executive branch? The president. How about judicial? Judges, but who specifically? Who's the guy? Does anybody know? They're called the Chief Justice, right? He's like the numero uno on the Supreme Court, okay? And then what about for the legislative? There's two different positions. Yeah, Speaker of the House for the representatives. Anybody know for the Senate? Or yeah, for the Senate? Who kind of runs that? Who's got the gavel there? It's the Vice President, okay? That's where you see a lot of those implications this year with the Senate races. Kamala Harris, the Vice President, is, since there's a tie, basically 50-50 or whatever, we're at, where there's Democratic power. Basically, Kamala Harris is the tiebreaker. Before Mike Pence, they had a majority in the Senate. So before, Mike Pence didn't really have to exercise that power. But we see that now going forward in the future. Clearly set forth in the first three articles of the Constitution, we have the legislative branch, the executive branch, the judicial branch. Why do you think we separate these powers? What's the reason? What's the point?
You can't put a fire up inside the house, so you don't separate it. If one goes down, the rest don't go in.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good metaphor. Yeah, I think you're on the right track too. Did you have something you want to add?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it stops one branch from getting too much power, right? If say tomorrow Joe Biden's like, I am the supreme leader of the United States, right? I'm supreme leader. Goodbye judicial branch. Goodbye legislative branch. We don't need you anymore. That's not allowed to happen, really. Okay, and the reason being is because the judicial branch would hopefully stop something like that from happening in the first place through this idea of judicial review, which is something that we'll talk about in a little bit. There's also, there's a bunch of different things that go on here. Okay, the way that these different branches check each other. So that leads us into the next question. What is checks and balances, right? You check something and you balance something. Each branch is subject to restraints from the other branches. Okay, so for example, the legislative branch might pass laws, but the president can veto them, basically nixing them. Okay, doesn't mean that that's always going to work out. Eventually, things could come around, and the president can't just say like nothing can pass, right? But the president can appoint judges to the courts. The president can appoint Supreme Court justices, regular court justices. The courts can declare the president did something unconstitutional, and that's something that comes up a little bit later. The Senate approves the president's appointments to the courts, but the courts can also declare laws unconstitutional. So the Senate has the power to look through and say like, hey, we're not going to appoint this justice. Probably, a lot of the reasons for political reasons half the time, depending on who has control of the House, the Senate, all that other stuff, who has control of the executive branch. It all just kind of depends. So this is all a way to make sure that the one part of the government doesn't get too powerful. Here's this idea: judicial review, power to determine if the actions of the government are within the Constitution. Can rule laws actions unconstitutional? So either one. So whatever the government's doing can be declared illegal, null, or void if a government action is found to violate some provision of the Constitution. So it's not really established at the time of the Constitution's creation. Okay, it takes all the way, I think until like the 1780s or so, or I think it's maybe 1803, somewhere around there, in this court case, Marbury versus Madison. For the court basically creates this power for themselves. However, it actually turns out to be a pretty good thing. So there's probably a reason why we still keep it around, because it's a very, very good check. It keeps things kind of in line. And this is kind of something that you're seeing, like if we think about the First Amendment, or whatever. Let's talk about quartering troops, right? In one of our amendments. When you're quartering troops, so like that's the idea of having troops in your house. Like you have to let the troops come stay in your house. It's something that is protected against in the Constitution. So if tomorrow Joe Biden was like, I'm deploying the National Guard to Bloomington, they don't really got anywhere to stay, so they're going to stay with you guys. Is that constitutional? No, right? We're not forced to do that, okay? That's something that we're protected against in the Constitution. So if that happened, what branch do you think is in charge of telling them that that is unconstitutional? The judicial, right? The judicial branch. That's their check. That's their power. That's where they get all their, their sway, okay? And that's why you see often this is one of the things that has made the Supreme Court so powerful. They weren't always this powerful, but it is, arguably a pretty good thing to have this check. This is the reason why everybody was, if you're on the Democratic side, you're looking at the most recent Supreme Court nomination, you're saying, okay, that has a lot of implications for maybe my policies moving forward. There's a reason why it is one of the most important things that a president can do. Does anybody know how long a Supreme Court justice serves? Any idea?
A long time.
Yeah, a long time, right? Pretty much as long as they want. I mean, RBG was serving through like a crazy range of cancer and like broken hips, right? And she's an old woman and she's still serving because she was able to, right? And she didn't want to leave her job. Does she have to leave her job? No. There's a thing with Supreme Court justices. They can pretty much stick around as long as they want. Probably a pretty sweet gig. It's a little bit difficult to remove a Supreme Court justice as well, okay? Federalism. This is the division of power between a strong central government and regional state governments. Federalism, arguably a good thing. Some people argue a bad thing. This is one of those big kind of ideas that you have going forward in the Civil War. What do you see with, now, have you guys talked about the Civil War in any of your classes yet? Have you guys taken U.S. history? Right? So you should know that the Confederates are all about what? They want more power for who? States, right? And you can see that the Union is kind of, I'm not saying that the Union is going around saying we want the world's strongest centralized government, but they're definitely leaning more for a central government as opposed to these state governments. Even today, do we have state governments? Yeah. Yes. Does Indiana have a state government? Yes, it does. And you can see differences, things that we'll see, different things like, what can these different states do? And it kind of gets back to this different amendment that we'll talk about when we get to the Bill of Rights today. So I'll table that and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Let me ask you this. Is the Constitution set in stone? Anybody know? Yeah, it's on paper. It is written on paper. It's not written on stone tablets. But is it set in stone? Is it unchangeable?
It is, but it's also a big process. You can't go back and erase one of the amendments that are there already.
Yeah, exactly. And those amendments can have an effect on the rest of the document, right? And can kind of, they effectively draw back on something.
I think Amendment 5,
but we'll talk about it anyway. So
you can't change any of the first 10.
So we'll talk more about the 10th anyway in a little bit, but it kind of gets more at like you know, the 9th and 10th kind of go hand in hand. So I'll table that discussion just for when we get to there. But with the Constitution, like, is it set in stone? Well, what does the word amendment mean? What does it mean to amend something? Yeah, to change it, right? To alter it. So with that in mind, and the fact that there are 27 amendments, is the Constitution changeable? Yeah. Well, like he said, you can't necessarily go back and, like, you're not just going to take an eraser and get rid of everything that was on there, right? Sometimes you have to make these amendments to, you know, make changes. Like, obviously, we had the issue of prohibition at one point, okay? Do we still have major prohibition on alcohol in the United States? Yeah, they're getting better. They're getting better. Give them a little credit, okay? They started selling on Sundays. So, yeah, but changes can be made, okay? Now, what do you guys think? Should it be set in stone? Should changes be allowed to be made or no? You don't think so? Anybody else? Do you think changes yes? Changes no?
No. Changes yes.
Changes yes?
Changes no to the first 10. Yes, to things after.
Fair?
That's what I'm.
Fair? Yeah?
Same way with the-
Fair thought process, would you say?
same way with the-
Yeah. I think a lot of people probably feel that way. That makes sense. And I think that's okay. I think that's a good way to feel. And you can feel any way you want about it, honestly. It's your supreme law of the land, right? This applies as much to me as it applies to you guys. That's the interesting thing about the Constitution. It's supposed to apply to everybody equally. Okay, so with that in mind, understand that there are amendments, though. Things do change. And I think that I would say that most people who are in the vein of saying, like, yeah, amendments should exist and we should be able to change this document, I would say probably the majority of them would agree with you guys on the fact that they don't want the Bill of Rights to be changed, right? That is a kind of an idea. But you do find people that make certain arguments against, you know, different amendments like Amendment number 2, right? Whether you support it or you don't support it, there's people out there for sure, right, who might find different opinions on that matter. And again, that's one of the best things about government, one of the best things about history. One of the reasons why I love social studies is that you're allowed to have those opinions, and it's okay. It doesn't make you any better than anybody else. So, moving forward, amending the Constitution. Spoiler alert, yes, it can happen. There's 2 ways to do it. You can do a formal amendment, which is the actual change to the Constitution. It has happened only 27 times, though I would argue, given the context of the Constitution, 27 times is actually a decent amount. Could there be more amendments? Should there be more? Yeah, I would argue that there should be some things that should be fixed. You know, and I think a lot of people should, you know, take that into account and maybe think about it as well. You know, what can we fix with the Constitution? With me, I agree with the idea, you know, it's a kind of a living document, right? I don't think it's wrong to update the Constitution. I think it should be a very difficult thing to do for the most part, right? I don't think it should be something that's changed very often or like willy-nilly, like whenever you want. But I still think that there's probably some issues that we could tackle a little bit better that maybe could do with an amendment. In the, you know, the process of that, it would involve a lot of research and a lot of deliberation, obviously, and I would hope that a correct decision would be made. I don't know when we'll see the next amendment, right? Or if we'll see the next amendment. You know, could happen in your lifetime, could not, right? I think the last one was 1992. So it's not unheard of for a recent amendment, okay? So this could be something that you guys see, but remember that at this point in our lives, 1992 is still pretty far away. So we got some time in between something happening and something not happening, okay? It is not unheard of to see a change to the Constitution. So you have the formal amendment. This is the closest thing that you're going to get to a permanent change, right? Still, even that is not permanent, okay? You do, like I said, with prohibition, you see things happen and then things kind of repealed, brought back. But still, this is probably the closest thing that you'll get to a permanent change. The reason why I say it like that is because you also have informal amendments, new laws, presidential action, court rulings, customs, right? All these different things. One of the things with this, you know, this is something that happens daily. You know, President Joe Biden could come in and issue 7,000 executive orders tomorrow or whatever, right? He could. Yeah, he's done a lot of it. And honestly, a lot of presidents do come in and they tend to issue some form of executive order.
Which is like, I think the most.
Yeah.
That's ever been done.
So you have a lot of executive orders coming in. And the reason why that happens is because executive orders are, you know, one of the biggest power kind of tools for a president. It's one of their easiest ways to make immediate change, right? They don't really have to deal with so much deliberation. They can kind of do it. They can't do anything that they want, but they can kind of go through and make some serious change in very sweeping motions. All right. Now, the thing about those is that the next administration could come in and be like, psych, right? We talked before about how, like, Constitution, you can't take a giant. Has anybody ever seen that episode of SpongeBob where he's got the giant pencil? Yeah, you can't do that with the Constitution, all right? Can you do it with executive orders? Yeah, you can doodle bob it all you want, right? You could go back and you can change things. You could do a new executive order that wipes out a lot of other things. So you see that informal amendments are not as powerful as formal amendments, but this is government, okay? This is what's happening every day. We see changes all the time. It's not as crazy of a process as actually setting up amendments, like real amendments. Everybody get that? So now we have the Bill of Rights. And again, so I think we'll end up ending early because this is the last section that we kind of got to get through, is these 10 amendments. We got a little bit to talk about, but I think that we'll get through these relatively quickly. First 10 amendments included because the Constitution did not include a specific declaration of individual rights. Why do you think they care? Why does anybody care about having individual rights? Any idea? They're rights, right? They are something that you're experiencing a lack of under King George III. Remember the context of the Constitution, all right? It's a bunch of very irritated colonists going through a lot of this stuff, and they're finding out that there's certain ways that they want to be treated and certain ways that they don't want to be treated, okay? So, starting off with the First Amendment, included because the Constitution did not include a specific, this is the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment is freedom of speech, religion, peaceful assembly, petition, press. What does it mean? What does it mean? Well, it guarantees the freedom of speech because the thought process there is that if we limit speech, we also limit progress and knowledge. They don't want to limit you arguing. They don't want to limit you arguing, right, with the government or governmental policies. Said this to some other classes. Can I get on Twitter right now and just start trashing anybody in politics? Can I do that?
Yeah.
Can I argue with governmental policies? Can I go on Twitter and yell directly at the governor of Texas for opening up the entire state and getting rid of his mask mandate like today? Yeah, is anybody going to jail me for that? No, because the thought process is that, you can have two sides of each argument kind of going back and forth, and one of the biggest ways to see progress in a lot of things, whether you like somebody else's argument or not, is deliberation, is arguing to a certain extent, It limits our progress and knowledge to only have one path of thinking. Having everybody's ideas and opinions coming in can be really, really positive in a lot of ways. That's the Constitution, man. Sometimes it gets you. You up? You good? I can't tell if the snore just stopped. I'm not mad, don't worry. Okay. Freedom of speech does not cover libel, right? Slander, sedition, fighting words. I'm not going to spend too much time on these because we spent time on them the other day. Libel, obviously, emphasis on written. Slander, emphasis on spoken. Sedition, this is a different thing. Advocating the overthrow of a government or person in power. It's surprising to me that the idea of sedition isn't brought up more with the entire Capitol protest or demonstration or riot or whatever you want to call it. You have a lot of people arguing on either side. But regardless, I think it's interesting that we don't see this word tossed around a little bit more with there. Regardless of what the motivations were, it's surprising that it's not kind of more seen. Fighting words. Words spoken to incite a violent reaction. Remember, this was the thing that we saw the other day where it was like somebody had spray painted something like kill all Arabs, right? That is obviously going to fall under the category of fighting words. It would be no different if you did something else that would be, it doesn't always have to be like against a certain ethnicity or culture. It doesn't always have to be racist, right? But oftentimes you do see that it goes that way. It could be other things as well. But either way, fighting words, words spoken to incite a violent reaction. And then freedom of religion means Congress cannot establish a national church, right? You can't have the National Church of Golf. It's not happening. Maybe if I'm president one day, we'll just wipe out the Constitution, right? Would you guys vote for me? No? That was immediate. Well, I guess there goes my campaign dreams. George. Okay. Well, I can change my name to George.
So,
Yeah. It's sedition. Sedition, yeah. So you can't establish a national church. You can't prevent one from practicing a religion of choice that is within the law. You also can't stop people from not practicing a religion. Okay? You can't persecute people for being atheists. I think that for the most part, this is an amendment that most people would look at and be like, all right, it's a pretty good amendment, right? We don't really do too much with that. Pretty solid one. I think we're good with the First Amendment for the most part. Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Felons cannot legally have firearms. There's a couple other things. We've gotten better, obviously, over time with background checks. Many people would argue that there's still a little bit more to do there. Some people argue for less restriction on it. Whatever side that you fall into, know that the Second Amendment is one of those more, again, not a lot of people are arguing, over the First Amendment. Some people argue over the Second Amendment quite a bit, okay? And this is one that you'll see. It's kind of a point of contention in the United States. It's something that's pretty unique to the United States as well. You go to like the UK, you're not going to be seeing gun stores like every, if you go to Martinsville, there's like, I don't even know how many gun stores out there, right? Has anybody ever shot a firearm? Yeah, I have. I live in Indiana after all, right? Yeah, it's like a rite of passage for a certain aspect, okay? Some people are really into guns. Some people are not really into guns. It's just something you see. Number 3, no quartering of troops. We talked about this. If I join the National Guard or something, I can't just be like, this is my Airbnb right now, and I'm paying $0, and you guys have to make me breakfast. All right, I can't do that. It's not happening under the Third Amendment. Number 4, no search, seizure without probable cause and a warrant. Anybody remember what probable cause is?
It's like,
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, you good? I don't even know. I don't know. Probable cause. You were saying?
Like whenever they have like their suspicion.
Yeah, there's suspicion, right? If you're driving around and they smell alcohol in your breath, is that probable cause? Think so? Yeah. You roll down your window and the cop's like, wow, somebody's been smoking a large amount of marijuana in this car. Is that probable cause? Yeah. You're probably going to get, maybe they'll do, maybe they'll check your car if that's something like that happens, right? Yeah. Yeah. Those like the don't drink and drive commercials. Yeah. And that's sometimes, I've known a lot of police officers. They said, I don't know if I told you this, guys, but I worked with a lot of them at the fireworks store for whatever reason. Kind of a weird, mix of people there. But yeah, they're really good at finding probable cause, right? Even sometimes when it might not be there to a certain extent. But you do find things like, if you have alcohol in your breath, you're probably going to have to take a breathalyzer. And if you fail to do that, or if you fail the breathalyzer, you're probably going to get arrested, right? But those things need to happen. A cop can't just pull you over, in a perfect world, a cop just can't pull you over and be like, I smell alcohol in your breath. And you're like, okay, I don't have it, right? And you might be able to argue that in court. It's going to be a difficult thing to argue, right? So there's some issues and some things that you'll see throughout times and throughout court proceedings with probable cause. It's I would say another point of contention, okay? I'm not saying that cops are going around just doing that. I'm just saying that, if you wanted to, it'd probably be pretty easy to do something like that, right? So it is a point of contention in some areas, but realistically, probable cause and a warrant, their looseness is meant to protect you in 2 ways, though it can have its pros and cons, okay? Obviously, you don't want it to be a situation where cops are going to a building that's on fire and they're like, well, I'm not quite sure if this building's on fire. Or if they saw, if they heard shots fired and you're getting shot in your apartment, you don't want the cops to have to sit outside and be like, well, I knocked, right? Nobody's answering. You don't want to deal with that, okay? So there are pros and cons to probable cause, but then you do have times where it does seem like it's a little loose in some areas. And so people do argue against that stuff sometimes. But for the most part, I think that this is something that is good for you, that is in there for your own protection. Number 5, right to due process. No double jeopardy, no self-incrimination. Does anybody know what double jeopardy is? Any idea? It's not like the game show.
Again, trying for the same crime twice.
Yeah, you got to go through the whole court proceeding, though, right? You got to go through the whole thing, deal with the whole shebang, and they got to tell you, like, you're not guilty. Judge does the gavel thing. I don't know. I kind of want a gavel up here. It would be kind of cool, right? Judge does the gavel. You're not guilty. Jury finds you not guilty, right? They can't just start. They can't be like, oh, well, first time didn't work. I guess we'll try again, right? We think you murdered that guy. They're like, no, he didn't murder that guy. They're like, well, third time's a charm. We think you murdered that guy. And then finally they find a jury that says, yeah. Does it work like that? No, right? So no double jeopardy. Another thing that's there to keep you safe, to protect you.
If new evidence comes up, like, let's say they go to the whole court proceeding, and then afterwards, they find a video that shows completely solid proof that person A killed the guy, right?
Well, I think that would be different, right? There's a movie called Double Jeopardy. And the basis of the movie is that this lady, her husband frames her for murder, right? And she's found not guilty or something like that. And then she finds that he like ran away. He wasn't actually dead. So she's like, well, double jeopardy doesn't exist. So then she actually murders her husband. And then she's like, well, I got off with it, right? If something like that happened, you're going to jail, okay? Double jeopardy won't protect you from something like that. So I think in that situation, if something like that happened, they would retry you for the crime. It would have to be significantly different though, right? They would have to like, it would have to change in enough ways. Something like new evidence might play into account there. There would have to be a significant enough change, right, in the trial. It wouldn't just be like you can't just keep getting a redo. Basically, is what double jeopardy is for. So yeah, maybe look into that movie. It's a little dorky, honestly. It's not really that great of a movie because it doesn't follow the actual basis of double jeopardy very well at all. I don't know who was writing that movie, but they did a bad job. Due process. So no self-incrimination. They can't be like, Mr. Doff, did you steal that stuff? I'll be like, I plead the fifth, right? I didn't. I don't want to talk about it. Number 6, criminal court proceedings, fair, speedy trial. That's nice, right? You don't want to be sitting in jail for 3 years without them charging you with something. Right to know the evidence being used against you. Great. All these different things. Right to know your evidence. Right to know what witnesses are testifying. Right to cross-examine. These are all the things that make court cases so interesting, right? If one guy just came in and was like, I got all these. Has anybody ever seen My Cousin Vinny? Watch that movie. It's old, but it's really, really good. Very funny movie. Does a great job of showing a lot of these different things. Super great movie. I wish we could watch it in here. So all these different things, right to know the evidence being used against you. That's something that is even touched on in the movie. He's like surprised. He's like laughing about it. In My Cousin Vinny, he goes, this guy's like a dummy. He just gave me all of his evidence. Well, he has to, right? And that's the best part. You're able to get all that evidence. He's like, oh, well, I know what witnesses he's using. Well, you have to know that, okay? Sometimes they wait a little last minute, but this is something that is legally required. It's constitutionally required. And then finally, 7, civil court proceedings. This is a little bit different than, criminal court proceedings. Usually criminal court proceedings is like the government's charging you, right? Civil court proceedings is usually like you're getting into a property dispute or something like that, or small claims court with your neighbor because they were drunk and they ran over your fence or something. I don't know. Yeah, or your dog. Who knows?
I'm gonna say dog, like kids.
Kids too far. Maybe they hit your dog. Your dog's fine. All right, your dog's okay, but they hit your dog. Now they got to pay for your dog's medical bills. Okay, that is civil court proceedings. It prevents the government from abolishing jury trials becoming too powerful by allowing judges to decide cases. That gets back to, obviously the revolution, time before the revolution. This happened a lot in the past. Judges were appointed by the king. and they would always side with the king, basically. Civil proceedings are different than criminal. Usually disputes among private citizens, usually with organizations, often suing for things like damages or compensation for, like money compensation. Number 8, no cruel and unusual punishment, no excessive bail. If I steal a candy bar, they can't be like, hey, we're just gonna cut your toes off. How about that? Sound good to everybody? Candy bar stealing equals toe cutting off. Sound like a good thing? No, sounds pretty cruel and unusual, right? Unusual too. I have to look up some unusual punishments that have been knocked down in the past because there are always some. So maybe I'll look up some of those and get back to you guys on that. No excessive bail. Remember, bail is that thing that keeps you in, from running away, keeps you going to trial. It's kind of like that collateral. And then the 9th, powers reserved by the people. So the 9th and the 10th go kind of hand in hand. The 9th, powers reserved by the people. What this means is that, in other words, there are things that you are entitled to, things that you have a right to have that are not necessarily in the Constitution. So this is stuff like the right to privacy, okay? Protecting you against things like voyeurism, creepy people, okay? Stopping things like that from happening, right? You have a right to privacy. This is still something, as you can imagine, these things aren't in the Constitution. So do you think they're hotly debated sometimes? Yeah, right? It's like, if people can't find a written thing for every single little thing, there's probably going to be some sort of point of argument there. And it makes sense. I can't blame them. What else? What are you going to do? So, number 10, powers reserved to the states, the one that we were talking about earlier. States can make their own laws in certain realms, such as drinking age, tax rates, right? So, if we get back to like Indiana, Indiana just, recently in the past year or so, when was it? Like a year or two ago, that they allowed you to start buying alcohol on Sundays. Previously, it wasn't that way. That doesn't mean that just because it was that way in Indiana, that it was that way in like Colorado, right? Things are different all around. You can see it right here with like the difference between federal and state laws, okay? In Colorado, obviously, marijuana is legal, like fully. In Indiana, marijuana is not legal. Even in Illinois, marijuana is legal. So even in like somebody that's literally your bordering state, Michigan as well, right? Marijuana is legal. So it doesn't matter necessarily always, right? The federal government can have these federal laws. Marijuana is still federally illegal, but you'll see that there are certain laws that can be kind of foregone, or you give more power to the states, right? The presidents in past years have come in and said, hey, this is something that we're going to leave to the states, just like drinking age, tax rates, state tax. They said, we're going to be hands off on this. It's federally illegal. But if your state says it's legal, then you're good within the confines of your state, okay? That is something to keep in mind with the 10th power. These are just ways of saying, like, if this stuff, like, it stops you from being too limited, right? And it stops the government from being too limited, but it also stops you from being too limited, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. That is all we have for today. That is it. You got a good 30 minutes or so to hang out. Online people, that is all we got for today. Do you guys have any questions?
Nope, all good.
All right. Well, I will see you guys on Friday, and I think that's when we're going to talk about the Bill of Rights. So I'll see you then.